can't say con with in good conscience.
Well, you can change it to whatever you want then. I don't give a shit.
Um, did you sell any of your Ethereum?
No, I haven't got paid out yet. It feels bad. It's taking forever. But
Because I was like I've been paid out, and I got a Newton account.
Newton, that's the exchange you're using?
That's the one I like signed up for. And right now to send a slow slow transaction from my MetaMask to Newton, it's $4.65 USD. So
I keep getting ads for Newton on Brave browser.
I couldn't.
Bad, man.
Newton, BitBuy, and ShakePay all seem like relatively equitable, unless you're like a power user, essentially. It just doesn't really seem to matter that much. So I'm just gonna mine straight to my Newton wallet. I don't give a shit.
Oh, just straight. Oh, okay. Into the
'Cause
Newton one
then
and
the
not,
deposit goes. The deposit will go to your Newton wallet. I'm hoping that the Newton wallet doesn't get jiggled around. I think it'll just stay consistent so that I won't go missing. But at this point, I don't really care.
You never know.
I just fuck it. Crypto, it has to be a bubble because
Oh yeah, 100%.
I consider myself like relatively smart. Yeah, and I like watch these videos on like what crypto is being used for and like how it's accessible and like how to mine and what wallet and like it's like this shit is fucking ridiculous. And like how does anyone who isn't like eat, sleep and breathe crypto like understand this well enough to not get absolutely ass rammed? Like it's just
Staking is an even bigger meme because like when I looked into that, I guess it's like they make these coins that instead of mining with a computer, you effectively validate through existing hashes of other coins. So you stake your coin, and then that's like how the mining is done instead of using. Just like what the fuck?
That's what Ethereum is going to. They're going to proof of stake, and so you'll have to set up a node to validate. You will have to stake 32 Ethereum, so that's like 60 odd thousand USD worth of Ethereum on the node, and then there will be I don't know how many nodes, but the more nodes there are staked, the less reward per stake, obviously, right? So it's kind of like self-balancing, and there will be pooled stakes, so you'll be able to find like a pool to stake your Ethereum if you don't have 32 Ethereum to set up your own node. But it's like. But right now, as far as I know, that they're actually starting to offer payouts because the payouts won't start for like another year or something, or 2022, somewhere in 2022. But some companies are offering like advanced payouts for like stake pays that are coming. Like I don't know. I feel like this is a whole fucking bubble. If I can't figure this shit out, then what hope does the average boomer have? Like,
well, like that's the craziest thing is actual boomers watching the telly are now just talking about NFTs and cryptos. It's like it's over, man. It's over.
Yeah, it's not gonna. It's not gonna pan out well for the majority of people if that's what's going on.
Ethereum makes way more sense to me than Bitcoin in terms of like what you're able to do with it, because you're able to actually execute contracts. But even then, it just doesn't seem like flexible enough to be realistic. And then like when it's in a bubble like this, yay, to send $35 worth of fucking Ethereum, I have to spend 20% of that in a fee.
Yeah.
Like it's just, I don't know.
Well, it's like the stock market's probably in a somewhat of a bubble. Fucking tech is like a big bubble, and then fucking crypto is insanity. Crypto is like
when you could do 1,000x margin.
Man, that's got to be a scam. Like there's no way when I look into it that that's not just a scam, because there's too much volatility that you're not going to be instantly margin called. Like
I think that's exactly the point. That's why
you run it for like half a millisecond at 1,000 times leverage, and just it's like slot machines. Like that's got to be how it works. Because it either goes up or you instantly get margin called.
But I
if
don't
you
even
leave
know
it in,
how you could like exit your position on something like crypto, because it's not like transactions are not instantaneous. They're like
yeah, it's just
fucking hours or days until your fucking transaction gets processed by the chain. Like it's just insane. Like I don't know, man.
like the odds that you don't get liquidated at the time it takes to end your transaction with a gain, it just seem almost zero.
I'm just gonna keep running my graphics card until it literally fucking lights on fire. And aside from that, like I just think it's all big fucking Ponzi.
I think it is too, but might as well cash in while you can. All right, so that's been really fun. That was 5 minutes of Ethereum and Bitcoin and why we're gonna all get ass rammed on thieves. So we can leave that behind and move on to an even more fun ass ramming, Canadian telecoms. So essentially, the topic is Canadians love to bitch about how high their phone fees are, their cell phone fees. So we wanted to actually see if it's true that they're the most expensive in the world, because that's the claim you always hear. Like, oh man,
no brag, just fact.
yeah, just no, exactly. It's like, we pay the most, and then that's like somehow a good thing. I don't know, but it's a favored bitching point of Canadians. So we want to take a look and to see if that's actually true. Are they the most expensive? If they are, why? What's going on there? So what were your guys' thoughts going in? Do you want to kick us off, Hubbards?
Sure. I am the average Canadian, essentially. I bitch about high prices, and I figured that Canadian prices are probably higher than pretty much anywhere else comparable to Canada. The excuse you always, like, I hear frequently, and I think it's probably just, Robellus propaganda at this point, is geography. Canada's big, therefore price high. I always thought that was like an excuse, because I've heard of other big spread out countries that don't have the same problem. Essentially, I just figured it's just collusion between TELUS, Rogers, Bell, because they have no competition, no foreign competition's allowed in. They're the only three. They buy out all other competition, and they just print money for themselves. I would say that prices have definitely declined a lot recently, just based on like keeping up with like pricing on having a cell phone and keeping up with the pricing. I remember when I first got my cell phone, it was like $60 for 1 gig, and they were being generous by throwing in voicemail for free.
Oh man, big spenders.
And caller ID. Caller ID used to be like a $5 feature a month. Like, oh wow! Now I
remember picture text messaging.
Yeah, and I remember doing that too.
And having to pay per text, like, so now you can get unlimited, text. I moved to a plan years, 4 or 5 years ago that was much better than that first plan, and now plans are even better. So plan pricing, it seems, has gotten better. That was just my perception going into this, but still not. I'm sure that's like been the trend around the rest of the world too. So it's not like we caught up. It's just, the whole world is getting cheaper because technology advances. And the only other thought I had was like the CRTC does kind of come in and make some shit happen to the best of their abilities to keep things, not too insane. If CRTC didn't come in and crack some skulls, things would be like even more dystopian and awful for the telcos. But,
it'd be wonderful for them. Shit for the rest of us.
Well, yeah, more dystopian and hellish for us.
Absolute
telco,
money printing machines for them.
Yeah, telco wet dream. But yeah, that's about
all. Price, what do you got?
Yeah, pretty similar first impression. The one thing I will say is that it never really clicked for me how bad Canada was globally because I assumed the US was pretty cheap cell phone prices, and you'd always see their ads and you'd be like, man, I wish our cell phone prices were that cheap. And then I was reading some articles about how the USA is basically a laughing stock of the industrial world in terms of cell phone pricing plans, and how it's just terrible over there. and Europeans and Asians have it so much better. I'm like, wait a second, the Americans have it way better than Canadians. That's kind of when it clicked that Canada was the worst. And other than that, the CRTC, from what they've done, it seems like they have kept the cell phone plans from getting insane, but for the most part, they've been circumvented by putting a lot of the affordable plans for regular people onto flanker brands that are not used by regular people. So then most people stick with the overpriced big name brands.
And the flanker brands, just to be clear, are the ones that they own, but just under a different name. So you don't, unless you actually went and looked into it, you wouldn't know that they're the same company. Like the parent company owns the flanker brand.
Yeah.
Some people don't know what that means.
Yeah, that's a good point. I actually didn't have the correct terminology before. I always just said either. Parent companies. Yeah, that's about the only things I have to add.
For me, pretty much the same. I knew that like Canadian, or I had at least had a good idea that Canadian brands, at least a few years ago, were pretty expensive comparatively even to the States, because I had helped somebody set up cell phone plans in the United States, and just like speaking with a couple of the different companies there, it's like how like I was asking them certain things. They're like, we don't do contracts anymore. Like, what are you talking about? 2-year contract? We don't do that. And then I had asked them about like, oh, like what about like data caps? Like, we don't do that either. Like, you know, it's all unlimited after certain. This was like 4 years ago or something, like quite a long time ago. I remember just thinking, Jesus Christ, like I have such an awful plan compared to this, and I pay even more. So I had a pretty good idea just from my own quote unquote market research that Canada was shit, but not too much other than that. I had read some articles where people are like relatively satisfied with their services from Canadian telecoms companies. Like, they're not incredibly angry. They might be upset about some prices or something, like bitch about that. But
they're not grabbing the pitchforks.
Yeah, like they're not actually that upset. Then, like from what I was reading, their ratings, their general survey ratings weren't horrible, like what you'd expect from listening to people bitch about it. But that was all I really had to add on top of your guys' thoughts. So you want to just leap right into it?
May as well.
All right. What did you guys come up with in your many, many torturous hours of research?
Well, this is like a funny one where like the Canadian public is actually right for once. So to put that in some numbers, there was an interesting attitude survey done on Canadians' thoughts on telcos, and 95% of Canadians said that prices are worse than other countries. 4% said that they weren't sure. 1% said they were about the same, and 0% said they were better.
For once, a survey actually produced a 0% response that's correct.
And they were right, because basically you can look at, different sources. There's a bunch of different articles that, it depends, because it's hard to like come up with like a weighted average that's perfect. But basically every time you look at any sort of world comparison, Canada comes last or near last. I saw one where they were studying 168 networks across the world, and TELUS, Bell, and Rogers were quoted to have the highest weighted average monthly prices. Those three were among the three worst, most expensive. All three of Canadian providers were among the worst, and Canada had the highest price in the study, as far as I remember, of all of them. So we do just across the board have worse prices. And you can compare it to, European countries, Asian countries, the US, right across the border, Australia. It's always consistently worse. Like, it's crazy how
the most favorable way of breaking it down that I saw was the average revenue per user as a portion of the average monthly wage, in which case Canada's peers were Japan, Slovakia, Hungary, Mexico, Korea, and then the Czech Republic almost as like the most expensive places on earth for cell phones. Everywhere else is significantly cheaper.
Well, that's actually interesting because I was reading basically a company aggregates the pricing across the world for data costs, and Canada ranked number 209 out of 228 countries for the cost of 1 gigabyte of data. But that study was a little bit, or that their metrics I don't like a lot, because they just weight all the plans kind of the same. So if someone has like an absurd plan, or if someone offers an absurd plan, it can skew the averages. So I don't think it's perfectly reliable data. But they did mention kind of 4 different types of countries in terms of mobile services. One is excellent infrastructure, basically countries that have like super developed mobile networks, and they can offer nearly unlimited or really high data caps to pretty much everyone for an affordable price, which really brings down their price per gigabyte and, obviously increases their usage. And so like an example of that is Italy. Apparently Italy has a very good network and falls into that. Then there's like the heavy reliance, which is basically countries that rely on mobile data for their primary internet connection. And they'll usually have a lot of providers and relatively competitive pricing because it's like your main way to connect to the web. Some of the like ex-Soviet states, like I think it was Kyrgyzstan, was like mentioned. Kyrgyzstan was mentioned as one of those places where, yeah, it's basically
India
the way
too, I believe.
No, India's a excellent infrastructure.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah. And then there's small consumption, which would be like a lot of African countries fall into this, where the network is pretty bad. So people use the very small amounts of data, and they'll sell like single day SIMs, SIM cards with like 2 to 5 megabytes a day data on them. Like that kind of like, so that's like a completely different than probably most people in Canada have any experience with, but you'll buy like a disposable SIM with 1 day expiry. Very weird. And then the wealthy economy class, which is basically good infrastructure, but not quite like to the point where they can offer unlimited or super high data caps, and a wealthy population that can afford to pay a lot. So that's like Canada, where our infrastructure isn't quite good enough to offer like unlimited consistently or super, 50 gigs for an affordable price, and people are willing to pay because they have good incomes and they prioritize mobile plans. So that, and if you compare it to your kind of grouping, I think a lot of the countries in that grouping would fall into that wealthy economy description, I would say.
The other thing is that I would put money that in that grouping, Canada gives you the least bang for your buck, because that's just grouping by how much people spend on cell phone plans, not what the cell phone plans actually are. So Canada is usually not very good on the bang for buck scale.
Right. So it's just comparing what you spend to the income, right? Yeah. So you're probably right. Somewhere like Korea, they probably spend a lot compared to their incomes, similar to Canada, but they probably get a lot more data than we do.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, in terms of pricing, it just is across the board pretty terrible. Although, coming back to what we were saying, our thoughts before and prices coming down, everything I looked at shows consistent price decreases over the last, I think the government first started tracking in 2008, and every year since 2008 has been a decline. So, I mean,
there was some stuff that stalled out, like the mid-grade range of like the 2 to 6 gigs. A couple of years have stalled. I think in 2019 it came down, but in 2018 it stalled out. So, while there has been some like the consistent trend is going down, but there has been some stagnation elsewhere.
I found interesting data on that. It's looking at revenue by the telecommunications company rather than cost per plan. So they have managed to increase their revenue from data, even though the cost of data has gone down. But their biggest increase in revenue from 2015 to 2019 was for terminal equipment, which includes handheld devices. So basically selling you a phone on the plan. And that has gone up 35% in terms of the revenue they make from that.
Yeah, I guess that's just because that's revenue. Obviously, that's just indicative of higher cell phone prices, right?
Yeah.
They're just, which I mean, I think anyone who's been paying attention to cell phones can attest to. 10 years ago, there was no such thing as a $2,000 cell phone. Just wasn't.
It just shows just how much Canadians are spending on cell phones now. Because, I mean, you can still get a reasonably priced cell phone, but a lot of people choose to get the best cell phone instead.
Yeah, or yeah, in the top echelon, right? Which, if you're even if you're not getting the best of the best, you're probably still looking at $1,000 cell phone, right? Like as a whatever, an S21 regular is what, $1,000 around there,
something like that.
Yeah, and then you can go all the way up to 2,000 for the ultra with the highest capacity. So yeah, lots of people I'm sure do have $1,000 to $2,000 cell phone. One thing to mention on that I found interesting, or maybe not interesting, but terrifying and cancerous, is TELUS is now default offering cell phone leases only.
Yeah, that's really strange. I hadn't heard of that until this research.
Yeah, so
I ran into that looking for a new phone. I was like, oh, this is a good deal. Like, and then I realized, oh, you don't own the phone at all. It was so shady.
You have to sign an agreement to bring it back after 2 years. So the price of the phone will be, say it's a $2,000 phone. Well, I actually have the numbers on kind of how the lease versus buy option breaks down. So TELUS for this is a top of the line phone, S21 Ultra. If you just go onto their website, the only option that pops up is $36.67 per month for 24 months. And then you realize that it's a lease, and you have to click a button to even see the buy option. And then the buy option is $68.75 per month for 24 months. And that's not even the most expensive configuration. You can go higher. You can go even beyond that.
Pump those numbers up.
Yeah, those are mid-tier numbers, but
this is wild.
To be honest, they must have the numbers on how this is going to work out in their favor. I can't really see how you you buy an S21 Ultra for basically you rent it for 2 years for whatever $800 versus buying it.
They're going to sell the phones to the other group of people who love that, and so they get to use the phone twice, right?
Well, obviously, but what I guess I'd say is, like, would you be willing to buy or even buy a 2-year a phone that's been hard used for 2 years for $800?
Oh yeah, I guarantee you there's a chunk of people who are I'm sure TELUS has internal data that shows that is gonna work. Like,
well, there's two options for them. Is they can sell it, which I think is less likely because they need to try and get the $800. But I think what they'll probably do is refurbish the phones and then sell them on their flanker brands as promotions. Like, you can now buy refurbished phones through Public Mobile, which is a first, and plenty of Kudos plans involve refurbished phones.
Yeah, but those are usually like barely used phones a lot of the time. I guess they do offer some very good condition. Like, they have condition levels, and a lot of them are like basically a few months old. Like, they really are like barely touched. My only thinking that makes moderate amount of sense is actually manufacturers incentivizing retailers to offer this option, because
then why wouldn't they be doing it in the States? Because it's not there.
I don't know, but it might be coming to the States. Who knows? I mean, Canada leads the world in greedy bullshit on cell phones, so maybe there's just TELUS
Yeah,
is
it's
the
just a matter.
first.
This is the bleeding edge of that.
The TELUS is the first one to take the plunge on being this degenerate, but like it just does. Yeah, it seems weird. Um, but yeah, that was just a side point that this lease thing is coming, and I can't imagine it not spreading everywhere in Canada and then maybe to the US as well.
Yeah, if it works, it's gonna work really well, I think.
Well, I imagine for the majority of people, it's actually financially better for them because without leasing, they would have just got a new phone every 2 years anyway.
And then sold the one for like a
$600 on
middling
Craigslist.
cost.
Yeah,
Well,
It
unless
depends.
it's
If
an
it's an
iPhone.
iPhone, it actually holds its
Yeah.
value for a long time. But
It goes up.
or not sold it. Like I think most people probably would just end up sitting on it and I'll sell that one day.
I do think there's quite a bit of that.
People are low initiative when it comes to selling used things.
Yeah.
Or
general.
they'll throw it over to someone they know, right? You know,
Yeah, that is the classic.
that's another thing. Or pawn it off for cheap to someone they know who is not
We're
willing
getting
to.
into such a phone glut in the world these days. Like it's just getting people new plans recently. And it's like, well, none of us need new phones. So we're just like getting new phones because you have to get them with the plans.
See, this is why I think that the manufacturer might be involved in this lease thing, right? Because phones these days are holding their kind of their own for a lot longer than they used to, like, and people are keeping their phones for longer. So the lease option basically forces you to return your phone after 2 years, and you can either return it and release it, which I don't know if they'll offer release, right? But you might feel worse about, if you have to return the device, you might just be tempted then to get a new phone no matter what, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If you know what I'm saying. Like it forces you into getting new shit because
I
you
think
have to.
I don't even know if it would force, but it puts you in a state where getting a new phone, like a brand new one every 2 years, is probably
Much more likely.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I think. I think it's to drive like people to get new phones every 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what. Because it's like, oh yeah, I was leasing that, for 2 years. Do I really want to?
Like the new one's out, it's looking pretty good. Like, might as well just swap over to a new lease.
Yeah,
I'm gonna roll the old lease into the new lease, and then I'll owe $3,000 on a $2,000.
No, because the lease is just like a rental, right? So it's like, okay, I was renting an S21 Ultra for $36 a month. Now I can either keep renting an S21 Ultra for $36, or maybe it'll be cheaper to rent an S21 in 2 years. But I can rent it again for another $30 a month, or I can rent a S23 for $38 a month. They're just, you know what I mean? Like the math for them is just going to make more sense to rent the newer version for the next 2 years, and then so forth and so on. It just incentivizes people to cycle through phones again, which they have no incentive to right now. There's no reason. If you have a paid off phone and you're re-upping, why would you? Your phone's completely serviceable. None of the new phones really look that much more attractive than your current phone. You're not going to do it. But if you're, only renting your phone, you're going to have to rent something. You might as well rent the new one.
To be honest, I think if the leasing was done right, it might work for some people, but I feel like that is not what's going to happen with it. So.
Well, I think it would work for those people who are always on the bleeding edge no matter what.
Yeah,
but
so it might be cheaper actually in the end for them, but it'll snag a whole bunch of people who might not have been doing that. They might only replace their phone every 4 years or 3 years, so it actually turns out to be a lot more expensive.
Yeah, that's what I think. They're trying to get more people into that pattern of being on the bleeding edge, right? And that's just bad, I think, for pretty much everyone. That doesn't really need to be on the bleeding edge, but it's kind of just
99.9% of people, because you don't need the new iPhone, the next iteration of the Pro Max version. You don't need it.
Yeah, so they're kind of just swept along by the business practices of TELUS or whatever provider, right? It's like they don't necessarily want to be on the bleeding edge, but it just the way that TELUS is setting it all up is going to push them along at $35 a month. No matter what, like that's just crazy. Like I I recently got a new phone, and my net cost is going to be like $250 for the phone outright, right? And that might last me 3-4 years. And I mean, I'm not criticizing people necessarily who want to be on or want to have a super top of the line phone, but even if you're
that's
doing
the
that,
thing that you like to do, then that's the thing you like to do. But you just have to make sure that if you're doing that, you're getting the better deal, right? Rather than screwing yourself. But this seems, I agree with what you said, Hubbard. It seems like a method to put people onto that bleeding edge track, rather without them really even understanding what's going on.
And actually, to your point on you saying the U.S. doesn't do this, actually, Samsung right now is doing a whole trade-in thing right now. Huge trading campaign in the U.S. for Samsung devices.
Apple also does a trading campaign.
Yeah,
as long as you don't have screen damage.
So
I bet you they give you garbage rates for your phone.
Samsung one's not bad, but it's better than you'd probably expect. But because a lot of people have like posted their trade-ins, and you can get like hundreds of dollars for like an S9 right now, like USD credit. But again, like those are usually credits to the Samsung store. Which what are you going to do? You're going to get new shit, right? And the credit doesn't cost them, as much as it would just to give you actual cash. Because it's just at cost for them, right?
I have to point out for the poor cell phone users among us, it's nothing but good news having more cell phones being refurbished by manufacturers, because I'd much rather buy a manufacturer refurbished old phone than a regular old phone off somebody that I have no knowledge about.
Yeah, I could see. I definitely could see that. Like if you're kind of willing to swim in the waters, that it might actually, the bottom 20% of cell phone turnover types might actually benefit from this. It's just kind of like the 80% that are going to be paying more to subsidize those. But such is life with everything, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If you're a bottom feeder, you're.
Well, I think that is a good jumping off point for talking more about flanker brands, because that's basically how the people on the flanker brands in Canada roll. It's about 25%, not 20%, and they're just the bottom feeders that are actually getting the good rates at the cost of all the people that are paying the exorbitant prices for the major brands.
That's true. I guess we should put some numbers on that. And explain like TELUS, Rogers, and Bell, like the actual branded, those brands. Right now, for an example, they are offering their entry level plan is 30 gigabytes full speed data, unlimited everything like talk, text, whatever. And they're finally in 2021, they're throwing in a caller ID for free. And then unlimited throttle data after your 30 gigs, and that starts at $80 a month. So if you're a heavy data user, that's not actually that bad, I guess, compared to previous iterations.
2 years ago, that's a huge step up.
That being said, if you go with a flanker brand like Kudo, Kudo actually just had the best pricing I've seen them offer on their website. People have obviously got better pricing and like win-back offers. Kudo has starting at $45 for 6 gigs of data, full speed, and no unlimited. After that, just you get 6 gigs. That's it. So quite a bit cheaper, but you get a lot less data. If you're a medium user, you're obviously going to want to save the $35 a month. So, like Price was saying before, it's a lot of people that don't really know about or don't trust the flanker brands and want to stay with one of the big names. They probably won't use 30 gigs, but they'll still go with the $80 a month plan.
And the even lower tier of flanker brands, like for TELUS, it's Public Mobile, and then there's Chatter and Lucky Mobile, which almost nobody uses those flanker brands. And for instance, I'm on Public Mobile, and with the deals, my plan started at $23 a month with 1 gigabyte, and now it's down to $20 a month due to refer a friend and loyalty. Every year you get $1 off your phone bill. So I have a $20 a month plan with 1 gigabyte of data, which I would say maybe not quite the majority of users, but like a large minority of users, that is all they need in a cell phone plan. And almost nobody uses a plan like that.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to actually looking at that survey information. The interesting thing that people say why they won't go to a flanker brand, the number one reason was they were worried, they were concerned about coverage and quality, essentially, which is hilarious given that, like, say, Kudo and Public use the exact same network Telus does. Like, it's the same shit. It's identical. It's Kudo uses every single tower that Telus does. There's no coverage difference whatsoever. It's the same fucking network in every respect. So Canadians just have this perception that, going from Telus to Kudo is going to lead to a worse, cell phone coverage, which is absolutely not true. The one consideration that they might actually be right on is customer service, because Kudo is a nightmare to get a hold of anyone, and when you do get a hold of anyone, they're awful. Telus is easier to get a hold of someone. I mean, from past experience with Telus, they're still awful once you get a hold of them, but
in Public Mobile, they don't even give you the option to get a hold of someone. So in a sense, you don't waste any time. It's just, there's no number to call. You can go onto their online forums, and other Public Mobile users will get bill credits for helping other Public Mobile users answer questions on their online forums.
Yeah, Kudo has a lot of that too, for sure. But you can eventually force a callback after spamming their chat bot with rep callback for a few minutes.
So that is another aspect of paying extra for the big name brands to get a modicum of customer service.
I would say not worth, because, like I said, once you actually do get a hold of someone at Telus, you'll probably want to tear your hair out anyway and just actually ruin your evening. But that being said, at least it's possible, because it is insanely frustrating trying to get a chat bot to schedule a callback and not succeeding. Yeah, so I think I would say that that's an intentional effort by the big brands, is just to keep their flankers kind of relatively unknown, ensure that they have mediocre customer support, and kind of just, sow the seeds of them being like a budget option that isn't very good, and then keep most people on their main brands paying the big bucks.
You never see advertisements, or almost never see advertisements, for Lucky or Public, which are the third tier super cheap brands. You just I don't see that.
Interestingly, I've seen a decent amount of Kudo. Not as much as I used to, but like when I was
Public
like
and Lucky, though, specifically
7 or 8 years ago, they even had TV ads. And then Public Mobile, I've seen a couple posters in stores that sell Public Mobile SIM cards, like London Drugs.
The big advertising dollars.
Yeah. The only thing that I ever saw for Public would be on a tram system, and that was it. Like that, but I'd never seen anything else. Never. That
just because
said, I don't see online stuff a lot, but
we're into like the deeps here of like the stuff people have never heard of, and this will blow people's mind that there's Petro-Canada mobility, and you can run your whole cell phone through Petro-Canada, and even better,
which is a gas station.
Well, it's Suncor now, but it's an oil and gas company. And then even better is President Choice Mobile, where your plans are like $5 to $10 a month with like 50 minutes, but you get unlimited calling to other people who are on President's Choice Mobile.
All 2 of them.
Like, I guess there's probably like very specific use cases where someone has abused the shit out of that, but like that's hilarious. I do want to point out, when we're talking about flanker brands as well, say the Kudo, their target situation is like between the 2 and 20 gigabyte range, right? Like data capped 2 and 20 gigabytes, and they leave, the big brands offer the unlimited 30 gig plans. If you compare it to the US, Um, the US is actually not on like the big unlimited plans. They're not that much cheaper. Like I was just looking, T-Mobile right now for one line, it's $75 a month for 50 gigs of unlimited 4G or 50 gigs of 4G, then unlimited 3G. So that's $5 cheaper, but you do get more data and you get I think the throttled speeds are better than in Canada. Um, but it's not that much cheaper. But then if you look at like the mid tier, Ting Mobile offers um, 5 gigs of data for $31 Canadian, which you can't get that in Canada. Like
No,
you're paying
that's like a
45.
minimum. Yeah, I was gonna say that's a minimum 40 to 50. Bring your own device. You're not gonna get any way. There's no way that you can access any of the phone deals, like the actual device deals, with that level of pay. It's just there's nothing like that in
So
Canada.
that's where they really like the that range, like the 2 to 20 gigs, is where Canada really falls
And
down
that
in
is
terms.
also the range in which the prices had stalled out for a bit, where, and because I think the reason for that is pretty obvious. That is where most people want to be. Like they don't really, like Price said, Canadians don't, you don't really use much more than like a few gigs. And so that's where most people ideally would be. So that's where they jack up the price. Because people see,
Uh,
you know, like they know how much they use roughly, right?
this is where to point out another problem is that people are lagging the current plans by a significant amount. Probably there's a substantial number of people that got their first or second data plan and haven't changed since then, because the average Canadian plan is costing $69 a month, and the average Canadian data plan is like 2.8 gigabytes.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a huge lag effect for sure. I mean that's just kind of a given that Canada still uses like 2-year contract situations for like device purchases. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times people will keep their plan for at least 2 years, regardless. Uh, the other interesting thing, like comparing the U.S. to Canada, was the like bundling and the like multiple lines. The US is insane, like the pricing once you have multiple people on the same account. Like the T-Mobile, that same plan that's 50 gigs, then unlimited. If you have 4 people, it goes down to $32. So it's less than half the 32 versus 75. So it's insanely cheap compared to what it is with just one line. So for like a family, that's actually really affordable to have 4 really unlimited phone plans for just over $100 USD.
Yeah, that's actually pretty busted.
Telus, in comparison, with 4 lines, you get $15 off per line, so $65 per line. So over pretty much just over double
Yeah.
the American pricing, and that seemed I did flip around to a few other mobile providers, and that was the same situation where if you're just looking at one line on those big plans, Canada and US look somewhat similar. Obviously, US a bit better, but then when you go to the multiple lines, it's just a blowout. Like, and I think a lot of people are in that situation where they have at least 2 lines, but likely 3 or 4 if you're a family. Like, everyone has
Yeah, you might
kids.
even have you might even have more than that, right? I think one of the interesting things that I found, so there's a lot of argument over like, oh, how are you supposed to compare data plans and blah blah blah. It's all different. So that being that, like setting that aside, there was a good study that I saw done by Visual Capitalist where they took a gigabyte, like they took the cost of a gigabyte of data in every country with so long as the country had over 1 million in population, and then they converted that to USD, and then they just stacked them all up against each other. And yeah, it's not perfect. Like obviously, it's going to have a whole bunch of issues, but when you're doing this massive data set, you can get some pretty good ideas, right? Like where places fall. And Canada was the most expensive out of the developed world. So there's only a few countries, like a very small handful of countries that were more expensive, and they fell into the line, Hubbard's, what you're talking about, like depending on, how developed they were, they could have a lot higher data costs. So places like Chad, Yemen, Cyprus, Cuba, those countries had fair bit more,
Yeah,
but Canada was still 12.55, like $12.55 USD per gig, and it just nothing else even got nothing other than Greece and South Korea got close to Canada's cost per gig. And when you're doing a huge comparison like this, you would think that if Canada was, somewhat in line with other countries, okay, there's a few things here or there that makes it a bit more expensive. But when we're just getting blown out by literally every country except for these nations that are highly undeveloped comparatively to Canada and a couple other ones, the States is $8 a gig and Canada's 12.55. Like that's such a huge difference.
well, I think that's the same data set I was referencing earlier, where I didn't love the methodology, because that one takes it takes every plan that they can find and determines the gigabyte per, or the cost per gigabyte for each of those plans, and then just averages it. So in Canada,
Okay, this is the same.
yeah, so in Canada, it did work out to 12.55 USD per gigabyte. But for an example, the most expensive 1 gigabyte that they found for the 60 plans they measured was $99.68. So I don't know where they found that plan, but that is not like, that obviously is going to massively skew the price in weird directions. And same with the US. The most expensive 1 gig they found in the US was $60. So I don't know if there's like an Alaskan provider that runs on Malamutes or something, but like it doesn't make any sense that there's anywhere in the US where you're paying fucking $60 a gigabyte.
Well,
Like,
it's probably what we were talking about earlier, where it's people just get a plan and then they haven't changed it for 6 or 7 years.
well, and the other concern I had with like looking at that is like the cheapest 1 gigabyte was $2.20 in the US and $1.78 in the Canada, and that doesn't make any sense to me based on like
Anything.
on the fact that you can definitely get cheaper gigabytes, if you just go online and look. Like there's definitely cheaper gigabytes, well, especially for the US, but Canada actually 178 doesn't sound totally unreasonable as the cheapest, but yeah. I do think that that sample wasn't useless. It did highlight some certain problems with Canada for sure. Just the fact that our cheapest 1 gigabyte is just so much more expensive than, I think one of the interesting comparisons is Australia, because Australia was rated to have slightly worse geography for cell phones than we are for wireless networks. Because Canada, that's the excuse, right? We were saying in the preamble that Canada does have shit geography, and the telcos hide behind that. And Australia was rated to have slightly shittier, and their cheapest 1 gigabyte is 28 cents. So why are they able to offer data that is, a magnitude lower than us?
Yeah. Well,
okay, with Russia
Australia,
too.
But Australia they spent $55 billion on building up their own like nationalized network.
Well, that's true. That's true.
That's
But
a lot of money to be thrown at the.
That's true. Russia, though, also
Yeah,
has
it's not like Russia's been able to nationalize anything.
17 cents is their cheapest 1 gigabyte. Their average is 52 cents. They were, they're again leagues cheaper than Canada. So there's definitely, geographically similar countries that are just way cheaper than us, and it makes no sense that the only logic there is geography. It just you can do it. And to be fair, like with the Australian nationalization, a lot of our networks were built up by public providers and then bought out by the big telcos, like BC and Alberta and Manitoba all had that happen.
Yeah. One of the things I found interesting from that same report is they looked at like the cost of data, and so they would control for the number of mobile networks in the country, and as that as that increased, the data dropped pretty significantly. So if you had two mobile networks, the cost of data per gig was $13.03, and then when you went to three mobile networks, it was $9.17, and then 4+ networks is $5.25. Again, because this study is not particularly well done, this is like back of the envelope type study, but I still thought that still gives you a general idea of what's going on, and for especially for Canada, because we just have the big three, really, because they eat up 90% of the market for telecoms. Like it's just another piece of evidence showing that that's clearly a problem.
Well, I think in Europe, one of the strategies that's commonly employed is to have a goal of having at least 4 providers for each country, and obviously European countries are much smaller. So you have 4 options for who you can buy from wherever you are in Europe, at least. And in Canada, like, we have 3 providers, but they often aren't competing in the same markets.
That's a point to make as well. But another like piece of evidence in that same vein is actually there is places in Canada that have an additional provider. The notable ones are Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Quebec, because they have provincial providers, SaskTel, Bell MTS, and Videotron. And the prices there the wireless prices are between 12 and 34% lower, and broadband is between 19 and 31% cheaper in those 3 provinces. So that's just adding one competitor that isn't, part of the Robellus monopoly, and you get noticeably substantially cheaper prices, and honestly such a decrease that it would put us more in line with the US and maybe other more developed countries. Like, if you can imagine a 20% cut across the board on wireless, that would be pretty neck and neck with the US. And if you go and look at pricing in, say, Quebec, for someone even the Bell, Rogers, and TELUS offer lower prices in those.
Well, and I think that is the most commonly seen proposed solution for lowering the cost, making cell plans more affordable, is on the next spectrum auction. I believe the CRTC is intending to reserve a section of the spectrum for regional competitors.
Interesting. Yeah, like because it doesn't take, it just takes one competitor that isn't part of Rogers, TELUS, Bell, and all of a sudden prices drop. So
I think we saw that in when Freedom Mobile showed up to basically Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton. I don't know how many other cities they were in, but locally in those cities, the plans just plummeted.
Yeah,
and
you
in rural areas, you actually could benefit from the promos to compete with Freedom Mobile in the cities, even though you couldn't get Freedom Mobile in the rural areas.
Yeah, that has happened for sure, and like there's been like win back pricing as well from especially flanker brand like Fido and Kudo especially have been offering because Freedom competes, I would say, more ferociously with the flankers than the big guys, and like Kudo and Fido have had some really, really good deals as win back deals to get people back from Freedom. Like
now it's all going away.
Yeah,
it's been bought up by Rogers.
Big old Rogers is gonna buy it. That's actually gonna be devastating.
Well, they're buying Shaw, which owns Freedom, and Price, were you saying that there's a possibility that Freedom might be parceled out of Shaw?
Yeah, the talks are that the CRTC might make them sell Freedom to Quebec Corp, which is Videotron, I believe, is their main brand that sells cell phone plans, so that they would remain as a competitor rather than just being subsumed into the TELUS Shaw or TELUS Rogers Bell
network.
Voltron.
Yeah, the Robellus. If that happens, though, you're pretty much screwed, because they would just like slash out Freedom. Why would they not? Like there's
Well,
no
if
reason
it,
to
if it
keep
goes to
them.
Videotron, that'd actually be, I think, a very
No, but
interesting.
yeah, like if it
scenario.
goes to Videotron, that's fine. But if it goes to Rogers itself, that is where I think the Canadian government, CRTC, has to step in for sure. Because
You
if
know,
it,
that's when Rogers, becomes the mega number one and just destroys, stomps to death Telus and Bell, and then there can be only one. It's like the Highlander scenario. They finally have the power.
yeah,
They just cut down Telus and Bell with the.
Although I liked, you made the point in your when you were speaking about how Canadians actually get benefits from these companies making so much money because Canadians can be invested in these companies, and it's like then we can all invest in Rogers, and then we all get our divvies.
Well, yeah, that is an interesting thing, and we were talking about Australia earlier, and Khan had mentioned that Australia spent sizable amount of taxpayer dollars to build up their nationalized network. Basically, as far as I can tell, in Australia, they have like a nationalized network, like the actual infrastructure is nationalized, and then they just sell access to like point of service providers that don't really do anything with the infrastructure. They just get to use it. So, Australia pays less for their plans, but they paid, they did essentially pay for it with their tax dollars. And then in Canada, Rogers, Bell, Telus, basically publicly traded companies that make a shitload of money, and most of their shares are owned by Canadians. So Canadians are getting back the benefits. You would say it's very much not equitable.
well, isn't like the CPP heavily invested in it?
I don't know all the breakdown of who owns what, but yeah, Canadians in general, I'm sure most Canadians have, with a retirement plan and with a
Canadian pension plan.
RRSP savings, investments, probably have substantial exposure to those three companies because, say you have like any sort of diversified index fund in your retirement savings or CPP or whatever, like you're going to have a slice of those three companies. But yeah, some would say that that's not the ideal scenario.
I just think it's an interesting take because like it's something I hadn't considered, but it makes a lot of sense. There is something to be said for having these large, stable corporations that print money in your country.
It is analogous to Canadian banks as well. People criticize their banks because we have Canada is very restrictive about who we let into, who the government lets do banking. So we have like a small number of banks that control all the money and therefore are able to, be fairly uncompetitive in terms of the fees and all that. But at the same time, like Canadian banks are like the majority of our stock market. Well, like they're a huge chunk of the Canadian stock market, and they print money. They're blue chips that just print money as well. So most Canadians are invested in this banks as well in the same way.
One of the funny things that I like, this is a smaller thing, but when I was going through this research, I was looking up like the price comparisons, of course. So the Canadian government every year, it's like the Ministry of Innovation and Development, something like that. They do a big study on the telecommunications industry in Canada, and each year they've been concluding like what we've been talking about. These prices are really high. They're really high compared to the rest of the world for the service you get. And every year, Telus and the other big companies come out with essentially hit pieces against these. But even more interestingly, one of the big reports that I was looking at was it's a Swedish company that does like global analysis, and they stopped including Canada inside of these inside of the reports because the big three would just attack their credibility. So just to kind of put it in perspective of, yes, they're printing money, but there's a lot of shady shit going on. And one of the things it's the same tactics that the tobacco companies used, and it's the same tactics that the oil companies used when dealing with climate change. And it's really funny and pretty gross to watch it play out with these Canadian telecoms companies. So people are getting nice fat CPP checks from them, but I think it would be better for Canadians not to have to deal with this garbage.
Well, the one like damning, in my mind, the one like damning statistic that I saw that was crazy is revenue per gigabyte used, and Canada had the highest revenue per gigabyte in the world, by a substantial margin.
Yeah, I was trying to find that. I know that I heard that report. There's a couple of them, but I couldn't find it. That actually gave that.
And the other just interesting thing is like Canadians don't use very much mobile data. The last statistic that I saw on it was 2 gigs per year or 2 gigs per month on average. And like just to compare that with other countries, Finland was the highest at 23.5 gigs, and the US was like 8.5 gigs, and lots of other European countries or whatever were multiples of Canada, right? So it's kind of crazy that Canadians that's probably a situation where most Canadians don't have a cap higher than 2 or 3 or 4 gigs. It's just like, and I'm sure that's changing. I think that data was a couple years old, but that there is the lag effect, and it just shows how far behind we are in mobile wireless pricing, that Canadians just opt out of using data. And you'd think Canadians would use a ton if they could, because we have a lot of like geography that would be conducive to using mobile data without Wi-Fi and stuff.
Yeah. I don't know. I went into this thinking like maybe there could be some some positives, but it coming out just made me realize oh yeah, these companies are absolutely just ass raping you Canadians. It's pretty bad.
Well, the only positive that I would say about the Canadian situation is we do have like a fairly good network in terms of coverage and speed.
Yeah, I was actually surprised about that. I ran into that too, and by some metrics, we have the second fastest LTE speeds in the world and 8th by others, which is like that's pretty good.
Yeah, like so it's not like the Canadian network is garbage or anything. Like it's actually a fairly strong network.
Yeah,
it's just
not getting hosed on that side at least.
It's just that it's not worth. We're definitely getting overcharged for that level of service. Like it's just, and we're also not using very much data. It's easy to have fast data when your customers aren't clogging up the network because they can't afford to fucking use very much.
Yeah, I'm a leech on the system, so I didn't feel like any more negative about Canadian telecoms than going into it with my $20 a month phone bill. Apparently learning that we have some of the best service in the world. I'm like, yeah, benefiting off that, and I'm only paying $20 a month.
Well, you have 1 gig of 3G speed, so I mean,
it's 4G data. It's just throttled to 3G, so all the connection's good.
So you don't actually benefit from the LTE, the Canadian second fastest network, because you get throttled to.
Oh no, but it's reliable.
That's true. You get reliability, but you don't get.
Because when I was in cities using 4G or LTE, it's so much slower in a city because you can't hit like the max speeds.
Right, compared to what you would be otherwise able to hit.
Yeah.
And then once 5G rolls out, then you're going to be 2 generations in speed behind. You're not going to be able to mind meld.
Man, the fact they're rolling out 5G to like cities of tens of thousands, it blows my mind. Like, how does that even make sense? That's crazy to me.
I'm not up on the 5G rollout, but I'd assume it's something to do with making sure that the rural areas get COVID as well.
Gotta get everybody. Can't let people go up to those areas and start hiding.
once everyone has the vaccines and the 5G activates the chip, like you need to get everyone. So you can't just hit the big cities. It's not feasible. Like, so, but yeah, I don't have any interest in 5G particularly.
No, that's one of the weird things when I've looked into it. I don't see any disadvantage being throttled to 3G speeds on an LTE network because like the speed isn't that important to me as much as like the reliability and ping. And like 5G is more a lower ping and more reliable, I believe. But it's like for a human use, I don't think there's going to be much different. It's mostly, it seems like for smart cars and stuff.
I also think there will be things that are allowed, or you know what I mean. There'll be uses that don't currently exist that will be brought about because of the 5G speed and ping.
Yeah, that's true.
Like you'll see things that you didn't see before with 5G. It just seems like I feel like it's going to take a few years to really matter. Like you're not going to really notice that the city has 5G until
like what are you going to do? Open a YouTube video at 4K and it would buffer on LTE, but it'll buffer faster on 5G. Like that's most people's use case.
Exactly. You can watch if you're sitting in the park, you can watch 4K, ultra high def, and yeah, there you go. Technology. I really don't see how that's an improvement over 1080 on your phone. I don't know if you'll notice, but I
don't think it's not going to be. I think what'll happen is like once we start getting technology that really is like infused a lot more throughout various things, it'll be a lot more of a noticeable impact, but that'll take some time for sure.
Man, the amount of like corporate shilling going on behind 5G is also pretty crazy. Like I was reading some of this stuff and they're just equating Canada being late to the 5G game as like potentially just putting us into like a second tier economic position in the world because we won't have our 5G rollout done.
Well, yeah, it's like I think the interconnection of of all the autonomous cars, that's 2 years behind. I don't know if that's going to make a big deal.
Yeah, I just don't think that you need to be on the bleeding edge to get the benefits of 5G at all.
Yeah, I don't think we'll see benefits for a while, but then people aren't going to buy useless trash off Amazon that's 5G enabled if we don't have it, right? So that's a big fucking economic.
5G will be the new Bluetooth. It just comes on everything.
Exactly. Like people are not going to be able to order 5G fridges in Canada because we don't have 5G network up. So we are going to be second rate because people will still be buying fucking manual fridges or Wi-Fi fridges, like a bunch of plebes.
Garbage.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not going to follow the 5G rollout. I'm not going to care. I ordered a new phone that's not 5G capable.
Yeah, same with me.
I don't give a shit. Maybe, yeah, probably the next time I'm up for a new phone will be when maybe 5G will actually matter.
I think there's going to be some benefit there, but like it'll take a bit. So, yeah, I feel like jumping on that hype train right now is probably not.
As long as Canada bans Huawei crap, I'm good with delaying the rollout.
One of the things that I found so weird
a long time
is that one of the reasons that Canada has really high prices and not a lot of competition is because you are not allowed to own more than 20% of a company, like a phone telecommunications company in Canada if you're a foreign company, and you can only own up to 30% of the parent if you're a parent company. So you're quite restricted in terms of foreign investment. You're very restricted. But for some reason, Canada, especially under Trudeau, seems to go full charge ahead with having Huawei, which is a known, communist government wing, setting up the entire 5G infrastructure. It's like, okay, you have all these other rules on the books that crush competition, so that, Verizon, an American company that, we shouldn't be like, yes, there's obviously privacy, data concerns, that type of thing, security concerns, but it's America. It's not the Chinese government. they're banned, but we can set up the entire infrastructure itself on on the back of the Chinese technology, which is 100% going to be absolutely riddled with exploits and backdoors into the Chinese government. Like, there's no way they're not doing that. I just find it bizarre that this is even a discussion being had right now.
I can't believe I have to remind you about this, but Huawei has a book with all their shareholders, and nowhere in that book is the kind of Chinese Communist Party. So how can anyone claim that they're related in any way?
Yeah, I totally forgot.
Totally transparent.
Yeah, there's a book anyone can look at.
Well, I mean, do you need any further proof that Trudeau is a communist dictator? Checkmate.
Yeah, and I mean, also, like, Canada's been probably at least one of the most public countries with being screwed over by Chinese industrial espionage, because we haven't had a strong national cybersecurity effort. So Nortel's the one, right?
Yeah,
they got hacked. CSIS told them they got hacked, and they figured, oh, we'll just send an email to everybody to change their password. Didn't even think, maybe if they got the passwords once, they could get the passwords twice. And then, unsurprisingly, they got the passwords twice. All of the information has gone over to China, and technically using Huawei is using Canadian 5G technology, because that was the technology Nortel was working on, among other things. And Huawei has a huge campus in Canada where they have a bunch of the cutting-edge Nortel engineers that they hired because they knew they did good work because they had all the info from Nortel.
Yep. China is unapologetic about just ripping off everything, and so I
complete and utter degenerates about IP and not giving a fuck about any sort of fair trade, any sort of rules, regulations.
The one thing I will accept paying higher costs for for wireless would be to ensure that China's kept out of the network.
Yeah, well, it's tons and tons of other countries in the West have already banned them, and so just like India and whatnot. The fact that Canada hasn't is just, it's a laughable situation to find ourselves in.
They are postponing.
Oh, yeah, so they were going to, but
they just haven't decided. I mean, that's very classic Trudeau government, where you just
sit around.
I mean,
I go one way or another in terms of like having actual, hard consequences to deal with. You just don't make the decision.
Hey, China does still have the 2 Canadian hostages they might execute at any given time when we choose not to use Huawei. Never know.
But Huawei and China aren't related.
Yeah, well, same with the execution. Wouldn't be related at all. It just happened.
Huge coincidence. So both Trudeau and Chinese government would have deniability. It's not related. Well, do you guys have any further thoughts that relevant to telcos?
Well, the big thing I came away with is that I think the CRTC needs to do a better job of informing consumers about what flanker brands are and how they work. Because I think that's, like, right now, you can get a decent deal. I think for 90% of use cases, you can get a pretty decent deal that's cheaper than what people are on. But people don't really understand it and don't have the, like, they don't want to slog through learning what flanker companies are, what flanker company works in their region. Like, even just something as simple as, like, Kudo, and then, like, in every Kudo brand, you'd have to have, like, the TELUS, like, underwritten under Kudo. So you knew Kudo was TELUS.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's the answer. I mean, I don't think it would.
I don't think it's an answer, but I think it's like something that should be done, like, out of principle and would help in it immediately.
I like the thought of them reserving bandwidth for regional competition, because it just seems like as long as Bell, Rogers, and TELUS have, like, the majority of the wireless revenue, it's just doomed. Like, it's gonna stay bad and expensive and shitty until that situation changes. And that situation, like, yeah, it's not, there's no remedy without that changing.
You need to have the competition. Like there's just you can't get away from that.
Yeah, so I don't know how you, but I'm sure the CRTC and the government, like, I mean, the government's directive for them to cut prices is, I think, good, because their consequences for that was going to be not favoring Rogers, Telus, and Bell for future spectrum auctions, which really pissed them off, and actually be a threat, because that's how they dominate the market, is they get all the spectrum and then they just like it is a monopoly between the three, because they own all the infrastructure, they own all the spectrum. You can't compete with them. You can resell off them, and you can, here and there in the margins grab some customers, but you can't actually meaningfully compete.
Yeah, until that's actually dealt with, until we get some competition, it's just not gonna be. It really is. It needs to be. The competition has to be encouraged. It has to be fostered. Otherwise, I think you can keep changing rules in other ways, or ask them, or do whatever else. They'll find a way around it, right? Until you just can until they're forced to just straight up slash prices, then there's nothing that's going to be done, right? Yeah. That's it for me.
Yep, that's it for me. I think this is kind of a weird one. Well, yeah, a little kind of funny that, the perceptions of Canadians in general are just right on.
Yeah.
It is as bad as it seems, and I just found that kind of funny that like it is what it is.
Alrighty.
Anything to add?
Wrap her up. Thanks for listening, everybody. Peace.